introduction to front-end ops, as this is a bit weird event, as there's like HelsinkiJS and DevOps Finland, and one guy already asked what's the common thing here, and he guessed it was that we all like a bit of a drink, so that's why we are here. So that's the common thing. But yeah, front-end ops, it's a term I met first in 2013 in the Smashing Magazine article written by this guy called Alex Sexton, and definitely go read that when you have time. And in that article he basically introduced this sort of title of front-end operations engineer, and he wrote that these front-end operations engineers are the enablers of long-term progress and the masters of the build tool chain for the front-end part of the website or web app. And and one thing I sort of started to like split this this term is that well, this sort of applies to generally DevOps as well, generally in DevOps, but front-end operations engineers are usually the ones who define the workflow of the developing the front end, and then how you test it, or what tools you use to test it, and then make sure it deploys to production fine, and then monitor how the stuff works there. And if we start with these, of course, aren't really like steps that one follows another. Of course, they have that sort of a meaning as well, but they're sort of a bit like this. But if we start with the development phase, and then at least nowadays the single most important thing in that development phase is like build tools. So build tools aren't like anything new for like, especially like people coming from the DevOps side. You've been working with those a long time, but maybe not like traditional front-end developers weren't. Nowadays they are, but weren't that used to those. So I sort of made up with this sort of two categories, like build tools pre-Node.js and build tools after Node.js. And this is just a couple things I came up with, sort of. And I don't know, maybe it was the XML, but I really hated Ant. but those were the two ones. But for me, as a front-end developer, the really great thing was when I saw like stuff like these GUI tools, which came along at some point, and it was really nice to just couple of clicks and you had set up like compilation from SAS to CSS, and that was basically, I could argue that for many front-end developers that was like first touch to like build tools, when you had like, oh, what is this SAS thing? You can have variables in CSS. Okay, now I have to compile it to CSS, and that was the first step for many. But of course, the problem with these things are, first of all, they're not cross-platform, and so if you had, for example, I remember that our team, when I started, I was using this, and then I was the only one who could like compile our CSS, so that was quite stupid. And another thing is that you can't really automate these things. And before I go to those Node tools, most of you guys know this, but the reason why we need like more fancy build tools in the front end is that we've put more logic into the browser, and I would dare to argue that most of us front-end developers nowadays, we're working with JavaScript single-page apps, or at least JavaScript-heavy apps, and it all sort of started when we started adding those, what's the coolest jQuery plugin, and then we threw in that into the page. It started with that, but now we're doing all sorts of stuff with Angular and Ember and React and stuff like those. And also the expectation for the user experience from the user's side has grown, that they expect more from the product. And there's actually this Twitter parody account that put it quite well, that in 2014 the steps to write some HTML includes like a lot of, you have to install Node and Bower and pick up frameworks and think about stuff, and only until step 47 you start to write the actual HTML. And that was like 2014, so there's like, that's a long time ago already. And For example, our team, we started with that. We start to like configure virtual machines with Vagrant, and that's like a first step. So there's like quite a many steps until you get the HTML. And yeah, luckily for us front-end developers, they came these Node.js-based tools, as we already knew JavaScript, and of course we are like, we suck at our jobs. We don't understand anything else than JavaScript. That's the thing. But luckily there like tools like Grunt and Gulp came along, so it was like really easy to build all sorts of different workflows for the front-end builds. And there's now at this time there's also like already a large ecosystem around these products, and as it is just JavaScript, you can basically hack together what kind of a workflow you just want. And before I continue this sort of small detail, but like a quick pro tip, that if you work with the Node.js based build tools, it's a nice idea to use this npm's package JSON to define the sort of the command line API for your build tool. So other team members, if you work with different build tools, other team members don't have to really think about, do you use Google Grunt or some other product or what else you have. And then there's also people who just use the npms because it provides these nice little ways of scripting. Yeah, now we have more sophisticated dev builds, or possibility for more sophisticated builds. You can compile from basically a lot of things to CSS, then you can add vendor prefixes. Okay, script concatenation and minification is old stuff basically, but the source files can be like, they can be CommonJS modules with Browserify or Require.js AMD modules and what have you. Then you can generate source maps and optimize images and generate sprites, SVG fallbacks, fonts, manifests, whatever you have. Yeah. Then do syntax checks and lints. And if you do TDD, test-driven development, you can have the tests running on the background. So there's lots of stuff actually going on, and these I think are now starting to be like basic stuff. There's even more fancy stuff probably out there. And when you combine this with the possibility watch for the file changes, that's like nice feedback loop going on. And then you of course have like dev servers, and that's the latest and greatest is the browser sync IO, which serves your front-end files and reloads the browser. And if you have multiple browsers, like mobile app, devices connected, it will sync your actions like scroll positions and stuff like that. And then because there's like lots of stuff, there comes the pain of dependency management just for the build tool. So you have to use npm to manage all the dependencies, so you have to install different packages that you get the build tool going on. And if you use Ruby version of SAS, for example, you have to have Ruby games in the system as well. So that actually has, there's a lot to configure, a lot to do. And then you will, if you use npm and Ruby games, you most definitely will use the public repositories, but you might also have like some private modules that do stuff. So you might have Sinopia, which is sort of a private npm registry, or Gemina box or Artifactory going on there. And so there's quite a lot of setup doing. And that was just the development phase. Now you have to test your stuff that it actually works. Also, okay, I mentioned the TDD there. These are, as I said, these aren't like strict steps that 1, 2, 3, 4, and they are like intertwined. But you can test your stuff while developing, and you can add Git hooks, and most definitely you run full test suites on the automated CI continuous integration server. But then there's like different sort of testing. I won't go really, because that's completely different topic, the testing. But generally speaking, we do end-to-end testing with Selenium-based things. So we run those tests against like headless WebKit, the Phantom.js, or our local browsers, or then we might use browser stack or Source Labs to like test against many browsers and many devices. And when you test, for example, when you test against browser stack, you can do a lot of things. You can, as I said, end-to-end tests with against many browsers, but you can also test your unit tests. And then there's, in browser stack at least, there's the screenshot API. So you could, for example, stitch together a small script that asks for screenshots for, let's say, a couple devices, and then between versions, or you deploys it, like does regression testing, or is there a like lot of visual difference and stuff like that. So there's a lot to do in that test phase. Then you have to deploy the application itself somehow, and there are many ways to start the deployment. There's like, I won't go to that there, you might have like big button you press and it will deploy and work like that. But how you deploy, that's actually the interesting part, because having been working with like Java projects and stuff like that, you might have like these interesting build steps. Of course, as I described, we already have really sophisticated and, well, too sophisticated that sometimes the build steps in the front end. But the nice thing about if you're developing JavaScript single page apps is that you can just like transfer files from place to place, which is basically what this guy is doing there. So he's throwing PHP files around with the FTP client. But that's actually sort of nice way to doing things. So it doesn't have to, okay, you want to automate that, of course, but basically you can just transfer files to the CDN and so on. And then after your app is hopefully running somewhere, you want to monitor it, of course. So you probably have some simple tests that, you know, do ping and check that, okay, it returns 200, okay, stuff like that. One good idea might be that if you have already end-to-end tests, you might want to run those end-to-end tests against your live site, so you'll know that it'll still work in the production as well. Then there's the big problem of monitoring the logs, because in server-side apps you had the problem that, well, not the problem, but the benefit that you could just check out the logs in the server. What does they say? But in the client-side apps, they have to sort of phone home to report that, okay, there's now been a problem. So one thing, of course, is to like put together your own custom system, or just for an example, use the Airbrake here, which is quite a nice product to do so. Then there's the interesting thing about tracking speed. The easiest way to get started, if you use Google Analytics, it provides out of the box, it provides this page load timing system, so you can go and check that out already if you have the Google Analytics. But then also you might want to set up, like Google Analytics provides this way of like it has this track timing functionality, so you can push like events to it and send like reports to it. So you might want to, there's this tool called Boomerang which has this ability, you can like track the timing of, let's say, if you have third-party JavaScript files or stuff like that, you can time how long do they take to load, and then you can send the like statistics to Google Analytics, or if you have a known server for that, or however you want to configure it. But there are a lot of possibilities there. Then there's a tool called PageSpeed from Google, which also does these things. It reports some numbers there. That's our blog. It's not 78 out of 100. I should do something about that probably, but it gives you this nice report. Also webpagetest.org does similar kind of things. It gives you like this nice waterfall view of how the basically similar kind of thing that you get from dev tools. And you can also install like private instances of the webpagetest.org, and you can set it up yourself. And it gives you like HAR files, which are basically logs of how the page loaded and so on. So then you can use those HAR files with this tool called Wiselo, which also like gives you like these scores and statistics of your app. And when you have this all sorts of like data about how your app is like performing and what it's doing and what's its health is, the good idea is to put it on some sort of dashboard, so you see what's happening, what's the situation of your product in live. And there are like many possibilities or like tools for that. Our team actually uses this dashing, which is from Shopify. It's nice, it's quite clean and simple, so you can get a quick view of what's happening in your product. And that's really fast like intro on what all sorts of stuff there is that you have to, well, not necessarily have to do. You can you can take the index.php file and throw it with the Qt to server, but what you can do with like these front-end ops tools you have. And basically the reason why I wanted to get you guys thinking about all the tools and all the possibilities that there are, and the key thing why I wanted to have this HelsinkiJS and DevOps Finland event is that there's like, as the Alex Sexton in the original article wrote, that there's this title of front-end operations engineer, and also he said that that doesn't have to be a title, it can be sort of imaginary hat you put on sometimes. But what I'm sort of thinking that maybe as front-end developers, we're hopefully at least quite skilled with the browser and with the specifics of how the front end has to work to perform well. And we actually have quite a lot of tools and interesting stuff, but they're quite new tools. And then their DevOps engineers have a really long experience on working like configuring and automating stuff. So I think there probably is some sort of way that front-end developers and DevOps engineers should like work together and sort of wear the front-end ops engineer hat, sort of like share it like a big hat that they put both into their heads. But that was basically my point, that there are lots of stuff, lots of tools that require configuring a lot of automation, which allow you to get the best performance and best like stability out of your product. And that's about it. That's it. Thank you.